Aim High Cohort 3 Pitch Day. We resume with Team Readiness. Let's give them a warm welcome.
Good afternoon. I'm Bon Black. I'm joined here with Jamie Hardy, Chris Cruz, and Chris Pavel, and we're Team Readiness. First, we'll start off to set the stage with a quick video. In 1974, the Congressional Budget Control Act moved the federal fiscal year to begin on October 1. The intent was to provide Congress with more time to process appropriations and particularly avoid continuing resolutions. However, the federal budget process has been broken for decades. In 17 out of the last 46 years, the fiscal year started with 0 appropriation bills completed. Since 1977, Congress has passed all of its appropriation bills on time in only 4 occasions, and the last time was 1997. The worst case is when the budget inaction leads to a government shutdown. The department wastes money preparing for the impending shutdown, government contractors stop all their work, and essential programs are suspended for weeks or months. However, in most cases, if appropriation acts aren't passed by the beginning of the fiscal year, Congress provides the budget authority through a continuing resolution. That budget authority must not exceed last year's funding levels, and no new projects are authorized. Continuing resolutions prevent the department from moving forward with any new priorities. This is the opposite of accelerate change or lose. Stalled negotiations in Congress this year almost led to a year-long continuing resolution.
Unfortunately, a year-long continuing resolution would stall progress towards today's readiness and tomorrow's modernization. Bottom line, would have devastating impacts on the Air Force's ability to retain quality airmen, maintain our readiness, and modernize for tomorrow. If held to fiscal year 2021 funding, the Air Force's military personnel account could lose up to $1 billion.
The first 2 quarters of fiscal year 22 were based on the constraints of last year's appropriation priorities. The 2021 budget included $3 billion for the war in Afghanistan, a conflict the U.S. has since withdrawn from. Those funds remained misaligned until the full appropriations bill was passed. 2022 saw record high inflation with a lot of our new conflicts. The Pentagon was losing $5 billion to $6 billion a month in purchasing power. Finally, after 4 continuing resolutions, the appropriations bill was signed by the president on 15 March of this year. The impacts on our readiness do not end now that the budget has been passed. Our commanders now are faced with a condensed period of availability in order to obligate those fiscal year funds. O&M and mill personnel appropriations have 1 year of authority that will expire on September 30th this year. Fiscal year budgets were designed to allow simultaneous execution, request, and planning of funds, but in reality, commanders are given a significantly reduced window to obligate those funds, which is going to delay the entire cycle. Quality contracting and planning takes time, and commanders are losing more of that time each year. From 2013 to 2019, the Department of Defense returned $80 billion to the Treasury in canceled funds. That's a staggering number. 97% obligation is an amazing accomplishment, but it is a symptom of our ever-shortening periods of obligation, and it applies use it or lose it type of pressure. The limitations that Congress imposes on the Pentagon will reduce our quality of spending. We propose extending the period of availability of O&M appropriations by 1 year from the date the appropriations bill is signed. The 1 year clock for current period obligations, adjustments, and expenditures for commanders should start once Congress passes the federal budget. Empower our commanders to implement the cycle as intended. This will enable higher quality contracting and provide appropriate planning windows. To keep pace with the great power competition, we must spend money based on today's mission, not last year's mission. As we get into our proposed solution, I want to talk through to make sure we're on the same baseline. There are 3 major ways that the DoD gets their authority. First is the National Defense Authorization Act, which establishes restrictions and limitations on obligations. So basically a contract that the government can be legally bound to. The next is the Appropriations Act, which gives budget authority, or essentially the ability for the DoD to incur a financial obligation. And period of availability is the time frame in which we have that budget authority. Next, we have to look at Title 31 of the U.S. Code, which are permanent fiscal statutes that really define the three major principles of fiscal law, which is using money for the correct purpose, under the allotted time, and under the allotted amount. Our proposed solution is focused specifically on the time aspect of fiscal law. O&M appropriations have 1 year period of availability, and that's going to expire on September 30th of this year. The National Defense Authorization Act is a legislative vehicle that can be used to alter language or resolve fiscal law issues. Section 8003 in the NDAA states that obligations are not available beyond the current fiscal year unless provided in the document. We're proposing that we put an amendment into the NDAA that extends budget authority for 1 year of O&M appropriations after the federal budget has been passed. So rather than those O&M appropriations expiring on September 30th, they would expire on March 14th of next year. The reasons to believe in this solution is this is already happening on a micro level. Within this year's NDAA, there are 25 examples of extensions of authority of different pots of money. What I have represented on the slide here shows an O&M account that was extended specifically for mill construction overseas. But what I want to highlight is how simple this language can be. Paragraph 2 that's highlighted in the yellow says striking fiscal year 2022 and inserting fiscal year 2024, turning those O&M funds from 1 year to 3 year money. There are other departments that are utilizing similar exceptions. The Department of Justice has a working capital fund in which their O&M appropriations do not have fiscal year limitations. The Oklahoma state agencies have adopted this principle and allowed for 16 and a half months of rollover authority beyond the fiscal year for their unobligated funds. The table on the screen is representing 40 respondents from those state agencies on the benefits of those rollover funds. 82% felt it gave them flexibility of spending. 67% felt that it encouraged savings. The DoD has been looking into similar solutions for years. In 2014, George Mason University did a study on how to curb use it or lose it spending in the government. Ultimately, they found that it was anecdotal evidence to support that the spending was wasteful, but it overall highlighted that there was a cultural change that needed to happen. And they still recommended that limited rollover authority could change that culture. The quote on the screen is from one of their professors stating that even if year-end spending spikes are not inherently wasteful, enabling executive departments to manage their budgets without an artificial deadlines would likely improve efficiency. The Section 809 panel on acquisition reform also came to the same conclusion that limited rollover authority beyond the fiscal year would improve our acquisitions pipeline. In 2021, the Government Accountability Office looked into what the impacts were on CR spending to the DoD, and largely what they found is that data is hard to discover because the DoD has been implementing impacts to the CR spending for decades. So the fact that we are mitigating this year after year just shows how normalized this is. And so quantifying those impacts is difficult. And it also leads to that culture of year-end spending. This year, we did quantify it at a hearing where in January, where all of our defense service chiefs spoke on the impact of a year-long continuing resolution on the DoD. $5.3 billion was the amount quoted that the DoD-wide O&M account would suffer for a year-long continuing resolution. $2.3 billion was specifically just the Air Force's slice of that. Of that number, $5.2 million was for sexual assault and prevention programs. $900,000 was for suicide prevention programs. As you all know, we didn't have a year-long continuing resolution, but we did have 6 months of a continuing resolution. And there are sunken costs associated with that we're still having to face. This year, we had 2 increases to our fuel prices. All of us in this room were affected by inflation of fuel prices and your own personal vehicles. And the DoD suffered $1.5 billion due to those increased inflation spending. And so that is money that is taken directly from our end of year O&M spending. Additionally, the Air National Guard for Virginia canceled 2 out of 12 of their drills because they were unable to pay for lodging for their out-of-town drill status members. So our commanders had to choose between retention and readiness, and that is something that should never have to happen. So our solution is a way that we can increase the efficiency of the money that we do get obligated, because next year we're most likely going to face a CR, and next year we're most likely going to face continued budget cuts. One of the paths to adoption there is to go through each of the DoD FM levels for approval and ultimately get an amendment to the Senate Armed Services Committee. Our team has spoken with SAF FM and specifically a branch chief at SAF FM who agreed that our solution is plausible and beneficial. His concern was over the financial management community. So today our ask is for your concurrence that those short-term adjustments to the financial management community are outweighed by the long-term benefits of our solution. And at this time, I will turn it over to questions for General Welsh and General Nazamus.